This analysis will contain spoilers. At the release of Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, some people were upset, wondering why Raiden is being so edgy. What's with the Devil May Cry style of campiness in cutscenes instead of the normal, dramatic Metal Gear style?
Fuck American pride! Fuck the media!
Didn't Raiden find peace in Metal Gear Solid 4, and isn't this ruining his character? In Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden serves as a stand-in for the player. He largely fills the same role in Metal Gear Rising, but with a largely opposite message. For those not in on Metal Gear Solid 2's subtext, Meta Gear Solid has excellent articles on the matter that you can check out, but here's a quick summary of them. At the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 2's Plant chapter, Raiden is addressed as Snake before the codename change, leading the player from being Snake into someone else. Then, to reinforce that, the player is asked to enter a name, much like an RPG asks the player to name their character. Raiden was a soldier raised on video games, VR missions, much like the player, and he comments on how they make him feel like a legendary mercenary, again establishing the link between Raiden and the player. Various other events through the game are meant to reflect on Raiden's status as the player, and it's clinched in the finale, where he discards his dog tags before walking off, and the dog tags display the name you chose at the beginning of the game. Metal Gear Solid 2 was a systemic examination of the relationship between the player and character, and intended to make us think about that role through allowing the player to succeed, then denying them success in the cutscene. This is why many fans, such as Metal Gear Solid, praise it so highly. This is an interesting enough thing outside the gameplay, but if the gameplay were bad, then it would have been wasted. Metal Gear Solid 2 has a massively improved stealth AI over the original game, and many more methods of playing around with it, and overall was only held back by limited content and not so great level design. Kojima later remedied this with Metal Gear Solid 2's Substance, which was intended to mock how people asked for more gameplay content by throwing their demands back in their faces with content that was meaningless, but ironically doing the game the justice it deserved in the process. Metal Gear Solid 2 would have only been a nice story if it were wasted on a lesser game. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance borrows the idea of Raiden being a metaphor for the players themselves, and uses that device as an invitation back to war, back to the heart of games. In the first chapter, Sundowner directly gives that invitation.
Oh, you're saying, give war a chance!
When Raiden's beliefs are further questioned by Sam, he answers that his sword is a tool of justice for protecting the weak. Sam's counter is that he denies the weapon its purpose, slaughter.
Now I see. You deny your weapon its purpose.
The connection here is between Raiden's attitude in the old Metal Gear Solid games and his claims to be fighting for right. Raiden, like the player, wants to play the role of a legendary mercenary, a force for right, not acknowledging that they are simply acting to kill. Namani is used in the prologue as bait to draw Raiden out and throw the gauntlet at him as a setup for the rest of the game. Despite Raiden's defeat in the prologue and the death of Namani, Raiden still pursues Desperado. The Prime Minister is ultimately a bit character. He gets mentioned maybe twice after the prologue, and Raiden obviously cannot uphold justice by protecting him. His missions in Abkhazia and Mexico are done at the behest of clients, but Raiden's there because he knows Desperado is. Raiden's actual motivation is revenge, as in the title. Not revenge for the Prime Minister, but for himself. The same way when you get beat down, you get back up and try again. You're mad at yourself for losing. You're mad at your opponent for beating you, and you want to show them who the boss is.
But our more immediate problem is Jetstream Sam. I've got my enhancements this time. He won't be an issue.
Raiden does all he can to play the part of defending the weak, like saying he wants to protect the children, but when given the chance, his true nature shows through. George is held hostage by the Doctor, and rather than attempt other options or go for a peaceful solution, Raiden takes it as an invitation to cut clean through George and the Doctor. That scene also acts as a parallel to the scene with Namani, with George saying not to worry about him and just to stop the doctor, but this time Raiden is able to wet his blade with blood. As Raiden travels through Denver to World Marshal Headquarters, Sam appears again to question Raiden's ideals. Raiden continues to spout his ideology about justice, but as Sam puts it,
Is your cause just? Or is that just what you tell yourself? Fuck you.
Sam further points out how the cyborgs he has been facing have had their fear response suppressed, indicating that they're victims as well. Raiden already knew this, having discussed it with his team in Abkhazia at the start of the first chapter. At the time, he condemned them to their fate, but listening to the suppressed fear response gives him doubts, exposing a prior cognitive dissonance he had when he originally asked who they got to become cyborgs. Despite knowing that the people he's facing suffer, he's still cutting them down. Despite the player ostensibly acknowledging that killing is wrong, they still persist in virtual killing, defending themselves by retreating into escapism. Then, in the talk with Monsoon, Raiden's ideals are torn apart most thoroughly. Here it is presented to him that he's used his tool of justice, his narrative framing, to ignore all the people he's killed. The player is using the illusion of justice to ignore the actual actions they've taken while playing, in favor of just witnessing the overall story of the work, to feel involved by participation rather than interaction. But then, rather than taking the route Metal Gear Solid 2 did of failure in the narrative for gameplay successes, Revengeance affirms the interaction itself. The truth presented is that the players play the game because they enjoy playing the game. Raiden kills because he loves to kill. The narrative framing, the justification, are just there to externally reinforce behaviors they already enjoy, so they can tell themselves they're doing something more than just enjoying themselves for the sake of it. This is reminiscent of a quote from Roger Ebert's blog post on how games can never be art. Do they require validation? In defending their games against parents, spouses, children, partners, co-workers, or other critics, do they want to be able to look up from the screen and explain, "I'm studying a great form of art"? Then let them say it if it makes them happy. Raiden acknowledges Monsoon's statements and his own cognitive dissonance. He told himself this was about justice, about protecting the weak, but he was wrong. Then he reifies something we should all know.
I learned young that killing your enemies felt good. Really good.
We all played games when we were young. Games have historically been filled with violence, sports themselves being preparation for war originally. This statement is a truth for gamers that we should culturally all know. As we grew up, we did what Raiden did and found other means to justify our actions. But underneath it all, we enjoy the thing for itself and deny ourselves that pleasure in pursuit of higher ideals. Raiden's transformation into Jack the Ripper isn't a creation of a new personality, it's a return to form, and it's worded that way in the script.
This is my normal. My nature.
The players acknowledging the reason they play and enjoying play for what it is isn't a change in thought, it's a return to why we originally played in the first place. Raiden disables his pain inhibitors, stating pain is why he lives, acting as a further mirror to us and our process playing games. It's a process of punishment and reward.
Pain. This is why I fight.
Narrativists frequently try to deny this, and in the process only make weak games or non-games. In order to accept games, we must accept challenging ourselves, which inevitably creates pain. Playing games is a process in acknowledging pain. We come up with these ideals of justice and higher calling so we can feel like we're a legendary mercenary, but fundamentally we're still playing for these base reasons, and that should be Raiden's wake-up call to you, the player. When you kill Monsoon, Raiden declares Monsoon's memes dead, but Monsoon quips,
Your memes end here.
No, I passed one to you.
As an industry and as consumers, we've had a massive shift towards high-minded ideals. We all love this medium so much we want it to be accepted as an art form, and somehow we think that adopting high-minded ideologies is the way to do this. Games try to be intellectual, escapist, deep in metaphor, but they've forgotten their base. We've all forgotten that games are a struggle. We protect ourselves against the pain of loss with easy difficulty modes and simplified, accessible gameplay with checkpoints scattered all about. Raiden's message to us is that we need to accept pain and remember why we play games in the first place. Because we enjoy them for what they are, plain and simple. Games are not just another piece of consumable media affecting a deeper message. They are interactive, about doing things, and creating possibilities with your own hands against all odds, which none of this passive media consumption is. Metal Gear Solid has, as a series, gotten bogged down with longer and longer non-interactive cutscenes and attempts at double talk and hidden messages. Metal Gear Rising appropriately exists to set the slate clean in hopes others will follow, in a way similar to how Metal Gear Solid 3 did, by playing up the camp and focusing on what mattered to the game. Even if it's a bit absurd to have a jungle in Russia, a Cold War mecha tank, a man whose body is split into tons of pieces conjoined by magnetism, or hundreds of cyborg children's brains. Where Raiden is the modern player clinging to the modern standard of game, Sam is our doppelganger, the gamer we used to be. He doesn't even pretend to care about the agenda the rest of Desperado has, he's just in it for a good fight, and he wants you up to that too. In the final boss battle of the game, Raiden acquires Sam's sword. Raiden's sword may have been a tool of justice, but he's discarded that. He doesn't give a damn about fancy speeches about the state of America, and the lyrics of "It Has to Be This Way" reflect Raiden's realization that underneath it all, he and Sam are alike, they just played for different teams. Many people think that the song refers to Raiden and Armstrong, but the parallel runs much closer to Raiden and Sam, and Armstrong's theme, Collective Consciousness, was already played in the Metal Gear Excelsis fight. This connection is more firmly established by Raiden's lines here.
I said my sword was a tool of justice. Not used in anger. Not used for vengeance. But now I'm not so sure. And besides, this isn't my sword.
Raiden doesn't give a damn about Senator Armstrong's ideals seemingly pulled out of nowhere. He's just there to fight the good fight, as Sam always was. With that, Raiden's growth is complete, and in the epilogue he leaves Maverick to fight on his own terms around the world. We can tell ourselves that we need all these motivations that games give us, this justice we want to act out, but this isn't pushing us forward, we're just being inauthentic. Metal Gear Rising is about taking up the blade for yourself, because that's what you want to do. It duplicates the old Sons of the Patriot system, manipulating the world with the warmongers because we need and crave systems to oppose us, and systems will rise whenever they are needed. The members of Desperado are barely interested in the actual plan Armstrong has at the end, because the plan doesn't matter. What matters is facing Raiden down, and every member of Desperado exists for that purpose, to echo Raiden's state of mind and draw him further into bloodshed. Sundowner and Sam went into Africa and toyed with Raiden just to piss him off. The antagonists have an evil plot to draw us in, but their actions are done to remind us to dig deeper and find out why we fight. Prime Minister Namani is forgotten by the second chapter, the harvested kids' brains aren't necessary for Armstrong's international crisis, and even Metal Gear Excelsis is only there to make the whole thing look like it's a bigger deal. They're all there to string Raiden and us along so we can learn to fight for ourselves.
It's like a dream. Well, maybe dream is the wrong word. They can kill some POWs, some civilians. They enjoy it though. We give their pleasure centers a nice big jolt every time.
But of course, what worth would any of this be if there wasn't a magnificent game backing it? Metal Gear Rising backs up its central message through strength as a game about combat. Enemies are aggressive and tricky to deal with. They team up ranged support with infantry in devilish ways and don't bother taking turns on higher difficulties. Revengeance goes the extra mile through its innovations to the beat-em-up genre. It decided to buck convention by inventing a totally new control system for blocking incoming attacks. Blocks and parries are performed by tapping a direction and the weak attack button to match the direction of incoming attacks. Beyond this, it allowed a number of cancels to keep the flow of action up, even if you were otherwise stuck in a block animation. They let you cancel that block into a dodge, but only at the beginning of the animation, which is also an attack. In turn, you can cancel the forward dodge into blade mode, allowing you to freely flow out of block strings into other attacks. Many other attacks can also be cancelled into blade mode, including almost any standing normal or heavy attack. The game accentuates its moveset by the variety and cancels available and differing at what point in the animation they become possible. The Stinger move, for example, is blade cancelable, but only after its active frames. Blocks only let you cancel into dodges near the start, and for many other moves only at the end. For players with good timing, perfect parries allow them to counter-attack for big damage, at the risk of a vulnerability in the case of a late parry. The window for perfect parries is decreased on high difficulties, requiring even more exact play. Perfect parries are blade cancelable, again allowing skilled players to keep the flow of action up. Rising went a step further with its QuickTime events by having the more interactive blade mode take their place in many instances, challenging the player to carefully cut to extract rewards, and it is possible to beat all bosses without actually using the blade mode, except for cutting them a single time in the finisher. The game could be beaten with just the wooden sword, which cannot cut, in every battle if there weren't a few fences and doors that needed to be cut. Also explored was the ability to cut off the limbs of enemies and have the enemies adapt to continue to fight back against the player with whatever body parts remained. There are still new techniques being discovered for the game, like using the ninja run to vault over enemies, canceling your attack, and letting you use ground attacks in the air. Another is the Sky High Cancel, performed by doing the Sky High move, jumping to cancel it, and then blade mode canceling the jump while still on the ground. Many thought Rising had a weak capability for stylish play at the start. That's still generally true, but its potential is still developing, though it will probably never reach the heights of Devil May Cry 4 or Bayonetta. Metal Gear Rising experimented with tremendously heightened aggression levels in the higher difficulties, making moving up through the difficulties a real test of one's ability to manage enemies and block attacks. It also has a number of unconventional enemy designs, like having automatic guns on the enemies in a primarily melee action game, uncommon for the genre. All the game really lacks is a fast weapon switch, which is regrettable given the variety and utility of the optional weapons. Between the well-executed gameplay and interesting subtext, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance acts as an effective callback to war. As a final note, if the player just skips all the cutscenes, their effect would be redundant, as their behavior is already in accordance with the game's message. You could say this is similar to Sam's attitude, not much one for talking, and ready to cut in when given the chance. By the end of the first playthrough, most people will be skipping the cutscenes, further reinforcing this. Of course, you have Sam's sword from the beginning of New Game Plus, so players are likely not using Raiden's tool of justice by the end. Metal Gear Rising, despite its flashy appearances, or perhaps because of it, has a lot going on under the surface. It's a hell of a game that invites the player to be himself and to cast away the overthought ideology. Because in the end, it has to be this way.
Forget it. We've both heard enough speeches about higher causes by now. History will decide who's right. End of story. Rules of nature!